Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The FBI can't tell us who planted pipe bombs on January 6th. They can't tell us who leaked the Dobbs decision. They can't tell us who put cocaine at the White House. But they were able to spy on a presidential campaign, lie to a FISA court, investigate parents showing up at a school board meeting, and of course saying if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're somehow an extremist. All that because I think the FBI is driven by politics today. In this Congress, this subcommittee has been investigating the political actions of the FBI and the double standard at the Biden-Harris Justice Department. We've heard from countless witnesses. We've heard from government officials and experts. We've heard from Americans targeted by their government, not just conservatives, but also Democrats. In fact, we were in a hearing in this room over a year ago when journalist Matt Taibbi was testifying. While he was testifying, it wasn't the FBI or Justice Department, but I think it makes the point, while he was testifying, the IRS was knocking on his door. Chilling impact, knocking on his door. Turned out they actually owed him money, but they did at the very moment he was testifying to us about the censorship going on in the Biden-Harris administration. Most importantly, we've heard from whistleblowers. We have one with us today, who we look forward to hearing from, Mr. Allen. As we have seen, if you're not politically correct, you're not in line with what the government thinks is the proper position, you become the target. Just as frightening if you're one of the good employees in our government who came forward to talk about the targeting, then you really become the target. If you're one of those good employees driven by your commitment to the Constitution, your conscience, and you come forward, they're coming after you. The FBI has used its security clearance adjudication process to purge its ranks of conservatives and whistleblowers, to unlawfully punish those with views contrary to the FBI leadership. Excuse me. Mr. Levitt has brought multiple whistleblower disclosures to this committee regarding the rampant politics within the FBI Security Division, which is tasked with investigating and adjudicating employees' eligibility for a security clearance. Whistleblowers described the Security Division of the FBI as, quote, a toxic work environment. Investigators were asking employees about their colleagues questions like, did they support President Trump? Are they opposed to COVID vaccinations? And we know they asked this because there's a questionnaire that they used, actual questionnaire that the FBI used to have colleagues snitch on their fellow workers. According to whistleblowers, the Security Division leadership under the command of Deputy Assistant Director Jeffrey Veltri created an environment where, quote, it was very common for investigators to ask inappropriate questions of an employee's colleagues, the content of which could never have been used to revoke a person's clearance. And by the way, what is Mr. Veltri up to now? The guy who during his time at the Security Division was described as being adamantly anti-Trump, he's leading the investigation into the second assassination attempt on President Trump in Miami. He's the special agent in charge in Miami. Whistleblowers reference specific cases where the FBI circumvented due process and ignored key facts during clearance investigations, including investigations of Marcus Allen, who we'll hear from, and Garrett O'Boyle, both whistleblowers who came to this committee. Both of these men stood up and said, this isn't right. What the FBI is doing isn't right, and they both had their clearances suspended and then revoked. But the FBI isn't going to get away with it. On May 13th, 2024, Inspector General Horowitz released a memo finding that the Justice Department and the FBI failed to comply with clear statutory and regulatory whistleblower clearance protections. On May 31st, 2024, the FBI reinstated Mr. Allen's clearance, stating that the original security concerns had been investigated and they were mitigated. All this after 27 months where they harassed Mr. Allen. Remember, Mr. Allen came before this committee on May 18th of last year. The night before the hearing, the FBI sent this committee a letter filled with lies about the whistleblowers that were going to testify that next day. The FBI questioned Mr. Allen's allegiance to the United States. Decorated Marine veteran, 20 years of having a security clearance, employee of the year at his Charlotte office. They questioned that. During the hearing, Democrats attacked Mr. Allen, first by imputing someone else's tweet to Mr. Allen, second by comparing him to individuals convicted of sharing classified information with foreign governments, ridiculous, and finally by saying he wasn't a whistleblower, he just had grievances. But that's not what the IG concluded, not at all. Mr. Allen was simply doing his job, doing it well, and for that, because he questioned the leadership at the FBI, he was harassed, lost his security clearance for 27 months, only to have it reinstated. So again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you and good morning to everyone here at this Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. In 46 days, Americans will go to the polls for one of the most consequential elections of our lifetimes. Americans will decide the composition of Congress as well as the next president of the United States. And then prayerfully, this Select Committee will be over because the purpose of this committee will no longer be necessary. What was that purpose? Well, it's what I said almost 2 years ago: to test out conspiracy theories, prop up those stories that the far right wishes to push into the American psyche, and to lay the groundwork for a dictatorial government led by Donald Trump. Now, immediately, you'll hear moans of disapproval, and X, formerly called Twitter, is going to call me a racist. They're going to call me a disrespectful black bitch because I have said words against the chairman, my white male counterpart on this committee. I'm a tool of the woke agenda. I've heard it, I've read it all as well as so many of my colleagues that are here. More moderate individuals will say I'm being an alarmist and that there's no way America becomes a dictatorship. We're just pointing out how the federal government comes after conservatives. But in the 2 years that we've been doing this Groundhog Day over and over and over again, there has been no evidence to show that the federal government, and in particular the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, or the Department of Justice has been wholly weaponized against the right. The same way my Republican colleagues have not been able to show that Joseph Biden has committed impeachable offenses or that Secretary Mayorkas committed any high crimes and misdemeanors. And they knew they never could because, as Biggie says, it was just a dream. We've had hearings and over about the federal government, again, the FBI and DOJ in particular, in the White House trying to stop free speech on social media platforms. Other committees, along with this one, have spent millions of taxpayer dollars interviewing senior social media executives, and particularly those that set the parameters of content moderation, to say that the sites unfairly come after conservatives. When what we have learned is that those executives have in the past tried to provide users with corrections to disinformation and misinformation, which may create health risks, put people in danger, or may have placed falsely by the enemies of our country to try to sow election disinformation and false narratives to weaken our democratic election system. This committee has been used to weaken that system, following the desires of far-right conspiracy theorists, and in particular, Elon Musk, to allow them free reign on these platforms. American civilians have been harassed, threatened, doxxed. And Mr. Musk, since you think tweeting or Xing or whatever it is you do on your platform about me is gonna scare me to be quiet, you obviously don't know what I'm made of. Generations of individuals who have fought for me to have the ability to say what I want to say, to speak the truth. You forget that this is not pre-1990s apartheid South Africa, the country of your birth. This is America. And there are more of us Americans that love our diversity, our rule of law, than there are of you who would like us all to be sycophants to your ego. The outcome of hearings of this committee have supported my claim that from the very beginning of the creation of this select subcommittee, that this has been the gaslighting to the nth degree, a tremendous projection of the highest order, that the evidence is the words of their leader, their would-be Führer, Donald Trump, and Project 2025, a 900-page manifesto of a transformed America. Donald Trump has spoken his intentions out loud, and his followers were so bold as to put it in a document with his knowledge to outline how they would create a state to serve the interests of a few at the expense of the many. Trump himself a convicted felon, has pledged that on day one of, this is a quote, "On day one of my new administration, I will direct the DOJ to investigate every radical DA and attorney general for their illegal, racist enforcement of the law," end quote. He has said that undocumented immigrants are, quote, "poisoning the blood of our country," end quote, language echoing the rhetoric of Nazi Germany, and has promised to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to, quote, "carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in American history." Who would defend his use of the law for that purpose? The Department of Justice. And he has promised, Trump's words, to stock the federal government, including the Department of Justice and FBI, with appointees loyal to him and only him. Not to the Constitution, which he has separately said could be revoked because if it doesn't do what he wants it to do, who will carry out his every order without question. The how to do these threats have been flushed out by individuals absolutely loyal to Trump. How do we know that? Because the vast majority of individuals who worked on his cabinet have stated they look forward to working with him again and instituting Project 2025. Russ Vought, former director of OMB and policy director for the Republican National Convention, wrote the details for the consolidation of executive power in Project 2025. Stephen Miller, a former advisor to Trump who has crafted the most sweeping immigration agenda, has been an advisor of Project 2025 through his dark money group, American First Legal. We remember Stephen Miller, the architect of Donald Trump's most inhumane border policies and the champion of the racist Great Replacement conspiracy theory. That's Stephen Miller. In April of 2022, Trump spoke with the Heritage Foundation after meeting with its head, Kevin Roberts, and said that the group would, quote, "lay the groundwork and detailed plan for exactly what our movement will do," end quote. Voila, Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for remaking the federal government if Donald Trump is reelected. Trump's words and Project 2025 are exactly what the Democratic members of this committee said back when this committee started that their leader, Trump, was trying to do. The mandate of Project 2025 for leadership directs the Department of Justice, which seems to be the main focus of so many of our hearings, along with the FBI, to fill the department with as many political appointees as opposed to career civil servants as possible, especially in the Civil Rights Division, the FBI, and the Executive Office of Immigration Review. Initiate legal action against local officials, including district attorneys who refuse to prosecute criminal offenses in their jurisdiction, specifically DAs in liberal jurisdictions. Criminally punish abortion providers who distribute abortion pills through the mail to patients in need of reproductive health care. Shift responsibility for prosecuting election-related offenses from DOJ's Civil Rights Division to the Criminal Division, which, according to the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and Human Rights, will open the door to sham investigations and aggressive prosecution of voters and election officials, and serve to intimidate state and local election workers already under threat and could criminalize election administration disputes. We could go on. This is the true weaponization of the federal government, and this is what we should be addressing today. But what are we doing here today in a subcommittee? 46 days before the most consequential election, we're holding yet another hearing in which my Republican colleagues will try to advance conspiracy theories about the DOJ and the FBI. Let me state plainly, contrary to what you will hear from my counterparts today, there is no conspiracy in the whole of the FBI to root out conservatives in that agency. What we do have is sustained campaign pushed forward by a single entity and a group of disgruntled former FBI employees who are known to have committed to attacking, smearing, and degrading career civil servants. So why are we having the hearing? Why have we had all of these hearings? What is the point of this subcommittee? Because it's necessary for the public and the media to hear, to try, and provide cover for the eradication of the Department of Justice and the FBI. We are having these hearings so that you become immune. You become inured to the notion of the removal of the FBI and DOJ, so that those agencies are no longer there to serve as a check against white nationalism, great replacement theorists, Christian nationalists, white fragility, fascists, and the twice impeached, convicted felon, former president and would-be dictator, Donald Trump. I yield back.
General yields back. I agree with one statement she said about this is going to be a consequential election. I agree with that. I would clarify for everyone, just in case people are confused, the election is in 41 days, not 46 days. Democrats may vote in 46 days, but Republicans will be voting in 41 days. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. The Honorable Michael Horowitz is the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, a position he has held since April of 2012. Mr. Horowitz oversees a staff of more than 500 special agents, auditors, attorneys, and support staff tasked with detecting and deterring waste, fraud, and abuse and misconduct in the department. From 2015 to 2020, he served as the chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, an oversight body for all 75 Inspectors General across the federal government. He's testified many times. We welcome him back to the committee. Mr. Tristan Levitt is an attorney and the president of Empower Oversight, an organization dedicated to enhancing independent oversight of government and corporate wrongdoing. Prior to joining Empower Oversight, Mr. Levitt was Senate-confirmed member of the Merit System Protection Board, which adjudicates whistleblower retaliation claims. He also previously served as the principal deputy special counsel at the Office of Special Counsel, which enforces whistleblower laws, among others. And Mr. Levitt, we welcome you back as well. Mr. Marcus Allen is a whistleblower and former staff operations specialist with the FBI. He has served more than 20 years as an intelligence professional. Prior to joining the FBI, Mr. Allen served in the United States Marine Corps, including in Iraq, Kuwait, and Japan. He received multiple awards for his service and achievement in both the Marine Corps and the FBI. Despite his track record of a commitment to his country, the FBI retaliated against Mr. Allen for making protected disclosures. After having his security clearance suspended for more than 2 years, his retaliation claims were vindicated and he reached a settlement with the FBI. And finally, Mr. Glenn Kirshner is a legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. He served 24 years as an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia, and he served more than 6 years as a prosecutor with the United States Army Judge Advocate General. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect, that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You can thank you and be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Again, you've all been in front of the committee before. You understand the rules. So we will start with Mr. Horowitz. Go right down the line. Mr. Horowitz, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. Whistleblowers perform an important public service, and no employee should suffer reprisal for bringing forward information that they reasonably believe is evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, or a violation of law. As we've seen, employees with a security clearance are particularly vulnerable to retaliation because an employee's due process protections and right to appeal a security clearance suspension or revocation are more limited. Moreover, such employees can remain suspended without pay for lengthy periods of time before having an ability to contest the security clearance action. Federal law requires agencies to have an appeal process that enables employees alleging reprisal due to a security clearance revocation or suspension lasting more than 1 year to seek Inspector General review of the reprisal allegation. The law also requires government agencies to establish a review process that, to the extent practicable, permits individuals with a retaliation claim to retain their government employment status while the security clearance review is pending. In May 2024, my office issued a Management Advisory Memorandum, or MAM, finding that the department's then existing policy didn't include the required IG appeal process for suspensions. As we noted in the MAM, placing an employee who claims retaliation on unpaid suspension while a lengthy security clearance investigation is conducted can make it financially unrealistic for the employee to retain their government employee status. Moreover, it creates the risk that the security process can be misused as part of an inappropriate effort to encourage an employee to resign. I'm pleased that the department has promptly responded to our MAM's recommendations. Separately, we've also received complaints about the security clearance suspension and adjudication process that go beyond the issues detailed in our MAM, including allegations of inconsistent compliance with standard operating procedures on the opening of security investigations, highly inappropriate investigations being asked, inappropriate questions being asked of witnesses during the security clearance investigations, inconsistent outcomes on security clearance suspension determinations, the suspension and revocation of an employee's eligibility to hold a clearance based on race, and retaliation against employees for raising concerns to management about security clearance suspensions, investigations, and adjudications. These allegations raise serious issues, and I would note do not apply to only a subset of employees with certain political views or ideologies. During today's hearing, for both investigative and privacy reasons, the only whistleblower retaliation matter that I can discuss is the one involving Mr. Allen. I'm able to do so because Mr. Allen recently settled his employment claims with the FBI, or against the FBI, with the FBI reinstating his security clearance and agreeing to provide him back pay. Following the settlement, Mr. Allen withdrew the retaliation complaint he had filed with my office, resulting in the OIG closing our retaliation investigation. Mr. Allen also waived any privacy rights that might otherwise prohibit me from discussing our investigation of the claims. As a result, I'm able to discuss with you today the factual details we learned during our investigation, which will illustrate many of the systemic issues that we've seen with the security clearance process. For example, in Mr. Allen's case, his unpaid security clearance began in early 2022 and didn't end until the settlement in June 2024. Most employees in Mr. Allen's situation would find it unrealistic financially to retain their government employee status for over 2 years without pay, which is in tension with the law's requirement that agencies allow individuals claiming retaliation to retain their employment status while a security review is ongoing. There are a number of other particularly important policy issues relating to protecting whistleblowers from retaliation that I look forward to discussing today, including potential legislative issues and potential actions raised in the written testimony and correspondence submitted for today's hearing. And as we seek, all of us, I think, to ensure that the security clearance investigation and adjudication process is never used to retaliate against whistleblowers and people who bring forward, in good faith, claims of waste, misconduct, and abuse. Thank you again for the committee's support, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Inspector. We now go recognize Mr. Levitt for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. When Marcus sat here 16 months ago, the FBI smeared him with the lie that he was a threat to our national security. That lie was repeated here in this hearing room. But 1 year later, the FBI reinstated his security clearance and agreed to restore 27 months of back pay. This amounts to an official admission by the FBI that claims about his disloyalty to the U.S. were false. His clearance should never have been revoked in the first place. And this year, whistleblower after whistleblower from inside the FBI security clearance office has pulled back the curtain on the dysfunction and political bias in the security division. Last week, I sent a 22-page letter to the committee outlining these problems. As that letter details, each and every one of the line-level employees who worked on the review believed Marcus should retain his security clearance. The initial investigator believed it, a second investigator believed it, the first adjudicator believed it, and a second adjudicator believed it. So how did his clearance still get suspended and revoked, contrary to both whistleblower retaliation and clearance adjudication law? High-level officials, at least one of whom is still in the security division, overruled these line-level staff and intimidated employees into doing what they wanted. Division employees lived in fear of a stranger bringing the so-called Kelly cart to their desk to package up their belongings while they were escorted out of the building and fired. And sure enough, of the 4 line-level employees who worked on Marcus's case, 2 of them also suffered reprisal from the FBI for trying to treat him fairly. In fact, the entire leadership of the division's clearance adjudication unit was removed in September 2023, apparently in reprisal for standing up to improper direction from leadership. Empower Oversight is now representing 3 current or former security division employees retaliated against by their managers. This summer, we disclosed to the public that the Security Division forced FBI employees to rat out their coworkers if they'd ever heard them, quote, vocalize support for President Trump or, quote, vocalize objection to the COVID-19 vaccination. We now understand that was just one manifestation of the FBI's politicized climate. Former Security Division leaders like Jeffrey Veltri, who's now running the investigation into the second assassination attempt on former President Trump, has a documented history of encouraging security clearance decisions based on political views and personal medical decisions. He and fellow manager Dina Perkins would often ask in staff meetings whether employees whose clearances were under investigation had received the vaccine. Veltri also suggested Marcus was delusional for being motivated by his sincere held religious beliefs. The tone for this intolerance seems to have been set at the top. In a February 2021 call with FBI managers, Deputy Director Paula Bate made what one observer called a chilling and personal direct threat that there would be consequences for anyone who questioned his direction. Given these statements, how is the American public supposed to have any confidence that decisions are being made at the FBI without personal bias or politicization? Over the past 2 months, since a former president was nearly assassinated and one man was killed, the entire country has seen how critical Secret Service whistleblowers have been to providing even the smallest measure of transparency. Yet those whistleblowers, like all other federal law enforcement whistleblowers, have stronger protections than the whistleblowers at the FBI. As some of you know, fixing this was one of my top goals as a congressional staffer a decade ago. But the House Intelligence Committee has repeatedly blocked reforms in this area. Incredibly, the other prohibited personnel practice laws that apply to the rest of DOJ don't apply to the FBI either. The FBI's internal handbook is the only prohibition on political coercion, nepotism, rigged hiring, and various other merit-based policies. How can you not end up with poor management and managers at an agency like that? OSC, my former agency, investigates the practices in these other agencies with recourse to the MSPB, another former agency of mine. For the FBI, Mr. Horowitz's office is tasked with these investigations. But his office doesn't have the legal authorities OSC does to seek a stay of a personnel action from the MSPB while it investigates. And unlike MSPB, Mr. Horowitz's office can't force the FBI to take any particular corrective or disciplinary action, even if it finds wrongdoing. Congress should fix this 1970s relic of an exception for the FBI and empower OSC to investigate FBI personnel actions with appeals to MSPB and the courts. As a broad bipartisan coalition of groups has argued, including in a letter that we submitted yesterday to the committee, it's also time for Congress to overturn or narrow the 1988 Supreme Court case Navy versus Egan. Because of it, neither OSC nor MSPB review whether a security clearance action was taken as a form of whistleblower reprisal. That should change, especially because it's become the FBI's primary form of whistleblower retaliation. Allowing the FBI to operate by its own playbook for so long has also had other consequences. Just 3 weeks ago, MSPB issued an order to show cause why it shouldn't impose sanctions against the FBI in one case. The bipartisan 3-person board wrote it's difficult to escape the idea that they have no intention of complying with the board's orders. Through the reforms I've outlined, Congress can restore the proper functioning of the civil service of the FBI. Both parties should support these changes. They would strengthen good government in the FBI no matter who sits in the White House or director's office. And while there's no way to erase the suffering endured by Marcus and his family or Garrett O'Boyle and his family and others, the FBI can hold accountable those who perpetrated it, and Congress can turn it into something meaningful by using it as the impetus to finally change these laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Mr. Allen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the invitation to testify today. My name is Marcus Allen. I'm here to speak with the committee about how the FBI weaponized the security clearance process to retaliate against me for protected whistleblower activity. In late 2021, I raised concerns about the FBI director's testimony about the January 6th Capitol riot, not out of political motivation, but out of a duty to truth and integrity. This act, which I believe to be in the spirit of transparency and accountability, led to unexpected and severe consequences. Almost exactly 3 years ago today, I forwarded news articles to my superiors and others within the FBI about January 6th. It was literally one of my job duties to keep my colleagues informed about open source intelligence related to their cases. As a result of simply doing my job, the FBI accused me of promoting conspiratorial views and unreliable information. The FBI questioned my allegiance to the United States, suspended my security clearance, suspended my pay, and refused to allow me to obtain outside employment or even accept charity. This once storied institution, whose initials ironically stand for fidelity, bravery, and integrity, was punishing me for bravely challenging their integrity while they questioned my fidelity. The suspension ultimately lasted for 27 months. During that time, the FBI held my family and me in indefinite limbo, awaiting a final decision. Determined to not lose our home, my wife and I took early withdrawals from our retirement accounts to survive. It became clear that the FBI, with endless resources, the American people's money, was trying to destroy me financially so that I would give up. This is a fear of countless potential whistleblowers who see the personal cost of integrity. There are no words strong enough to describe the impact the FBI's lies about me have had on me and my family. The stress has taken a toll on our health, and our children have suffered, traumatized by the thought of our door getting kicked in or dad not coming home. The battle for truth and justice will cost you, but the arduous good is worth it. The FBI's restoration of my clearance earlier this year, thanks to the efforts of Empower Oversight and the American Center for Law and Justice, was absolute vindication. It's a point I would not have reached without the prior help of Bigley-Ranish and Judicial Watch. However, the experience is also a stark reminder of the system's flaws. It took legal battles, public scrutiny, and patience over 3 long years. No other FBI whistleblower has ever had his clearance restored as I did. Garrett O'Boyle and his family are still suffering in the same limbo we were, with no access to due process and no limit on the FBI's ability to delay and avoid independent accountability. How many other whistleblowers remain silent, fearing the same ordeal my family and Garrett's family faced with little hope of vindication at the end? Despite the stress and uncertainty, I've never once regretted standing up for truth. In fact, I'm grateful for the experience. Indeed, my family and I persevered due to our strength and faith, God's grace, and the sacraments. If you do not worship God, then you will worship something else. You can either serve God or you can serve mammon, but you can't serve both. This has been a purification. While we lost material items, we gained more important things. We've stored up for ourselves treasures in heaven. What we have gained spiritually has far outweighed what was lost materially. John Adams noted that the framework of our country was built for a moral and religious people and unfit for the governance of any other. James Madison notes the duty to honor God is precedent, both in order of time and degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. Before any man can be considered as a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. I recently learned about comments made by Mr. Jeffrey Veltri suggesting I was delusional for believing in and seeking guidance from the Holy Spirit. Mr. Veltri currently serves as special agent in charge of the Miami field office, but at the time he was an executive at Security Division overseeing security clearance decisions. To Mr. Veltri, I say you can insult me, but you should not mock God. It is an all. This isn't about me, it's bigger. I am hopeful that the truth of what happened will be fully revealed and deter the FBI from doing the same injustice to others. Though the path may be difficult, I must plead with other employees who have witnessed wrongdoing that they find the courage to speak up. You're not alone, nor will you ever be. Psalm 139 says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" I've been blessed to be supported by God's sanctifying grace, the blessed sacrament, men and women of goodwill, other whistleblowers, the charity of the American people, prayers and great attorneys along the way, like Tristan and Jason of Empower Oversight. Potential whistleblowers, please do not be silenced by the FBI's mistreatment. We are all here to support you if you choose to come forward. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Equally important is the awareness and involvement of the American people. This is your country. While I feel vindicated now in getting back my security clearance, it is sad that in the country for which I fought as a Marine, the FBI was allowed to lie about my loyalty to the United States for 3 years. Unless there is accountability, it will keep happening to others. Better oversight and changes to security clearance laws are key to stopping the abuses suffered by whistleblowers like me. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Peace and all good.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, and God bless. Mr. Kirshner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the committee, good morning. My name is Glenn Kirshner, and for 30 years as a federal prosecutor, I enforced the rule of law without fear or favor and without any political interference in the important prosecutorial decisions I was entrusted to make as a career civil servant and public servant. The rule of law is one of the single most important ingredients to a healthy democracy. Indeed, the rule of law applied without fear or favor may be second in importance only to a free, full, and unfettered ability of the people to exercise their right to vote. I served in the federal government continuously under every president from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. Beginning in the 1980s, I served on active duty with the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, first prosecuting court-martial cases, then handling criminal appeals in all manner of cases, including espionage and death penalty. After 6.5 years as an Army JAG, I left military service and joined the Department of Justice, where I served 24 years as an Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. The decisions prosecutors make day in and day out, whether to open grand jury investigations, whether to seek indictments, whether to proceed to trial, these decisions and virtually every other prosecutorial decision must be made without any political pressure from anyone. They must be made in an entirely apolitical fashion, based exclusively on the facts and the law. Unfortunately, that is not what Project 2025 has in mind for the United States Department of Justice. When I look at the goals and aspirations of Project 2025, I can't help but evaluate them against the backdrop of what I saw happen to the Department of Justice during the Trump administration. As we sit here, one of Donald Trump's DOJ officials, Jeffrey Clark, is a criminally indicted RICO co-conspirator and co-defendant, together with Donald Trump, for trying to subvert the 2020 presidential election in the state of Georgia. I think back to Donald Trump, after being told by his DOJ officials that there was no systemic fraud undermining the results of the 2020 presidential election, telling those same officials, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. That's a quote from a Donald Trump Department of Justice official. Thank goodness there were some DOJ officials who thwarted Donald Trump's efforts in that regard. Officials who remained loyal to the Constitution rather than loyal to a man who was determined to retain the power of the presidency by disregarding the expressed will of the American voters. These honorable public servants would not exist in a future Trump administration that implements the rule of law busting principles of Project 2025. And I fear that horrific conduct of former President Donald Trump and his corrupt DOJ officials in his first term will look like a government official fixing a parking ticket for a friend, as compared to what Project 2025 holds in store. Project 2025's overarching goal for impacting the way DOJ goes about its work is to destroy the independence and apolitical nature of the work done by thousands of honorable, ethical, and dedicated civil servants who, in my experience in 24 years inside the Department of Justice, go about their work in an entirely apolitical fashion and replace them with Trump allies, loyalists, and sycophants. This is a so-called Schedule F approach to weaponizing the Department of Justice. Quoting from some of the truly despicable language that can be found in Project 2025's pages, DOJ is alleged to be a, quote, bloated bureaucracy with a critical core of personnel who are infatuated with the perpetration of a radical liberal agenda and the defeat of perceived political enemies. I spent 24 years inside DOJ. That characterization is dead wrong and untrue. As but one example of the dangers to law enforcement independence represented by Project 2025, consider this scenario. Once Donald Trump has his loyalists in place in the Department of Justice, if a report of possible voter fraud is referred to DOJ, Donald Trump's officials could screen or evaluate that claim with just one simple question. Does the alleged voter fraud work to the advantage of Republican candidates, so by extension to the advantage of Donald Trump? If the fraud benefits Trump, his Project 2025 officials can simply decline to investigate, summarily claiming there's insufficient evidence to open a criminal probe. But if the alleged voter fraud worked to Trump's disadvantage, then the investigation could be initiated regardless of whether or not the evidence supported that decision. This is simply a variation on the theme. I don't care if there was no voter fraud undermining the election's results. Just say there was and leave the rest to me and my loyalists in the Department of Justice. If Project 2025 is implemented, there will be no need for a corrupt president to recruit DOJ officials to join his criminal endeavor, as the conspiracy will already be in place. Project 2025's determination to extinguish the independence of the Department of Justice looks a lot like a blueprint for autocracy. I thank you for your invitation to appear today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kirshner. Gentleman yields back. We'll now proceed under a 5-minute rule with questions. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, in light of that ranting from Mr. Kirshner, And understanding that he has a long history working in the Department of Justice, I could understand why we're in the mess that we're in. We now have the details on what the DOJ is required by law to do, and its intentional violation of the law, and the impact that this has had on DOJ employees in the form of the loss of the ability to earn a living and having their lives destroyed. I want to take a step back and ask the question, why did they do it? I suppose for the same kind of reasons that Mr. Kirchner was just outlining, because they have some obsession of something that is actually not real. But they also didn't just violate the law for the sake of violating the law. They did so with the explicit intent of targeting a certain class of employees, and in this instance, those they perceived to be conservatives. One whistleblower stated, quote, that if an FBI employee fit a certain profile as a political conservative, they were viewed as security concerns and unworthy to work at the FBI. I assume Mr. Kirchner has the same viewpoint. Mr. Allen, does a person's political beliefs, and most specifically holding conservative views, disqualify someone from serving in the FBI?
No, ma'am, they do not.
Well then, based on your experience as an FBI veteran and target of the DOJ's unlawful acts, why do you think this political purity campaign is ongoing inside the FBI?
I'm not fully aware of why they're getting rid of people with more conservative views, or potentially not wanting people to speak out at this time, ma'am.
Well, and I think your testimony is that they also are trying to get rid of anyone who holds Christian values and Christian beliefs. Is that your experience as well?
That is my experience, especially when you see the comments that were leveled against me and the findings during the investigation.
So we have the gentleman sitting next to you ranting and raving about this Project 2025. I doubt that he really understands anything about it, but ranting and raving about that, but doesn't seem to be at all bothered by the fact that you were targeted because you were a conservative and a Christian. Do you find that odd?
I do find it a bit surprising. We shouldn't be targeting groups of people within our organizations because of firmly held belief or any kind of political standpoint.
And Mr. Levitt, beside the violation of whistleblower protection laws, the FBI is also, for example, using First Amendment protected speech and activity which occurs outside of work to punish its employees. Were the officials involved in this unlawful conduct, such as Acting Assistant Section Chief Dina Perkins and Assistant Deputy Assistant Director Jeffrey Veltri, punished or in any way held accountable for their violation of employees' First Amendment rights?
Not that I'm aware of. I know Ms. Perkins is still in the same position, and Mr. Veltri received a promotion to the 5th largest FBI office in the country, the Miami Field Office. According to whistleblowers, that promotion was delayed because he was under investigation for whistleblower retaliation, but that wasn't for the targeting of individuals for their First Amendment views.
Okay, so in this administration, and again, while ranting about Project 2025, in this administration, you can actually violate employees' First Amendment rights and get promoted. Is that what your testimony is?
I don't know why the FBI didn't look at this closer, because again, it's clear that there was a widespread understanding that these were issues being looked at, that these were the considerations. And I know Mr. Horowitz has talked about them not exclusively only targeting conservatives, but all of the individuals that have come to us from these various whistleblowers. There's one counterexample of somebody who wasn't conservative. All the others that we've seen, there was a clear focus on these individuals' vaccination status, their First Amendment views, their political stances, and that seems to have gone, been accepted by leadership of the FBI.
Boy, the FBI has really been weaponized against not only the American public, but its own employees, hasn't it?
It's sad. The term weaponization obviously can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but when you see the direct impact on someone's life, like Marcus and his family, to go 27 months without pay, as of today, he still has not received the 27 months of back pay that the FBI committed to give him. Similarly for Garrett O'Boyle, the amount of time they've gone, I think 23 months at this point, it truly has ruined their lives.
Well, what does this actually say about the Department of Justice and FBI and their interest in actually righting the wrongdoing and the unlawful acts that they've engaged in?
It's hard to make those kinds of sweeping conclusions, but I definitely would say that the way that you help keep people, you help them abide by good things by having good laws in place. And I firmly believe there need to be stronger laws to help prevent this kind of thing in the future. There have to be changes to protect FBI whistleblowers, no matter what administration or what political party is in power.
Well, and I would agree with that. And Mr. Allen, I'm sorry for what the federal government did to you. I think it's an absolute crime against humanity the way that you were treated. I respect your faith, respect your loyalty to this country, and we all recognize that what the FBI did was wrong. We thank you for being here, and with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I would just ask, Mr. Chairman, if we could stick to some decorum and not disparage witnesses or characterize their testimony. They're here as guests of the committee, and we should treat all of them with respect.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kirshner, the Project 2025 document, which was drafted by 6 of the former cabinet secretaries and about 140 individuals who worked in the Trump administration, with regard to the FBI, says that the FBI has been captured by an unaccountable bureaucratic managerial class and radical left ideologues. How long were you with the FBI? Your mic.
I was with the Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, just up the street here, for 24 years. I wasn't with the FBI.
Okay. Are you aware that of the close connection between the United States military and the FBI?
The United States military and the FBI?
Yeah. Well, we got to, there's a...
I'm sorry, the close connection meaning?
Well, there's a veterans preference for military veterans.
In hiring?
In hiring, going to the FBI.
Sure, I'm generally familiar with
Why don't I ask Mr. Horowitz? Mr. Horowitz, anything in your experience indicate that the FBI has been taken over by as they say, a radical left ideology?
We haven't found that, Congressman.
Mr. Kirshner.
Yes.
Going back to Project 2025, the Project 2025 indicates that to ensure the promotion of the president's agenda, the FBI should ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department and throughout DOJ.
Representative, you must have read my mind, because that's the very page of Project 2025 I just opened to. It's specifically page 569.
Let's talk about that then.
Please.
Okay, so right now, and Mr. Horowitz, right now, we don't allow political appointees within the FBI. Is that correct?
That's correct, other than the director who's
Right, at the top.
confirmed by the Senate.
That's correct. I'll come back to you on that. So this Project 2025 indicates that they're going to ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department, and not simply replicating what was done under previous administrations and reflected in the Plum Book. This is right from Project 2025. The number of appointees serving throughout the department in prior administrations, particularly during the Trump administration, has not been sufficient either to stop bad things from happening through proper management or to promote the president's agenda. Let's talk about that. What would the impact be if we all of a sudden just allowed the president to start putting political hacks, people who were his henchmen, into the FBI to pursue his agenda?
If you populate the upper echelon of these agencies with political appointees who have to pledge loyalty to the president, and the very language you cited, ensure the assignment of sufficient political appointees throughout the department to do what? To stop bad things from happening. That's a quote. Who decides what bad things are? And to promote the president's agenda. Right. There's nothing there about, and to, make sure you're making decisions based on facts and law without fear or favor. This sounds to me to be the exact opposite of what we want our civil servants and our appointees to be doing.
Thank you. Back to Inspector General Horowitz. Thank you for your good work. Can you talk about what the implications would be if the next administration were to allow or to inject political appointees throughout the FBI organization and throughout the Department of Justice?
Well, I'll speak generally to why Congress has in the past had only the FBI director be the only political appointee, and that person has to go through Senate confirmation process. Obviously, we want our law enforcement, whether it's federal, state, or local, to be people who may have, I've testified about this before, wide-ranging views. There is no problem with our law enforcement having deeply held political views. In fact, I think for most of us, we would want our law enforcement officers to be engaged with their communities and understand their communities and be participants in it. But we certainly wouldn't want them to effectuate the use of our laws to advance a political cause or an ideology. And frankly, through our work during my tenure as IG, my predecessor's tenure as IG, as we all know, there have been times when the FBI has strayed, both ways. You could talk about Dr. King and the illegal wiretapping that occurred with him. We saw it in work we've done, obviously, more recently. We have done investigations involving the FBI's looking into, back in 2004, both the Democratic and the Republican convention issues around those. So we've seen this over the years. It's very important to have hearings and have congressional oversight and effective internal reviews like we do to ensure that law enforcement operates in an unbiased way, not based on ideology.
And the injection of political appointees, would that help the the cause of a more judicious FBI and Department of Justice?
Well, it certainly would create risks of that, Congressman, and I'm assuming that's why Congress over the years has not authorized the department or federal law enforcement to have more political appointees in their realm. And that's true, by the way, at the department and the other law enforcement agencies as well. I know we're talking about the FBI, but that's true at DEA and others as well.
Thanks for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Allen, September 29, 2021, you sent an email questioning Director Wray's testimony in front of Congress. You said in that email, there is good possibility the DC elements of our organization are not being forthright about the events of January 6th. You remember that email?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't send that to anyone. You sent that to the people you're supposed to send it to, members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, the very next day I find to be interesting, on September 30th, 2021, the next day, just so happened, your 5-year reauthorization for your security clearance came due, and they said, no problem. Mr. Allen should keep his security clearance. After all, he's had it for 20 years, right? Yep. That happened the next day.
Correct, sir.
Decorated Marine veteran, employee of the year at the Charlotte field office, had a security clearance for 20 years. They reauthorized your security clearance. Something else happened that next day. Your email got forwarded to the security division and to Mr. Veltri. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then 19 days later, Mr. Veltri opened an investigation into your security clearance status. I get all those facts right, Mr. Levitt? Is that what happened with Marcus in those 2 days? And then 19 days later?
Yes, except for from what we can tell, Veltri directed that day that it be opened. It's just that the underlings under him didn't carry that out until 19 days later.
Yeah, and he directed, they look into a guy, decorated Marine veteran, held a security clearance for 20 years. They look into him because Mr. Allen said there's a chance the FBI leadership hasn't been square with us, right?
That's correct.
And he cited a New York Times article. They thought the same thing. And oh, by the way, there's the history that we all know about. FBI spied on the president's campaign, lied to the FISA court, investigated parents at school board meetings, said if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. So we got all that history, and he gets investigated for that because he simply questioned the leadership, went through the appropriate channels. Mr. Horowitz, did Mr. Veltri and the people at the Security Division follow the standard process?
They did not.
They did not. In fact, isn't it true that, Mr. Levitt, isn't it true that some of the people, I think you cited 4 of them in your statement, 4 people, the initial investigator, the second investigator, the first adjudicator, and another adjudicator, all got reassigned. They all agreed that Mr. Allen should keep his security clearance. This investigation shouldn't have happened, and they get reassigned or something happens to them.
4 of them all did not recommend that his clearance be, that there be a negative action on it. 2 of them were reassigned.
2 were reassigned. Some of them are whistleblowers now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Man, if that's not political, I don't know what is. Oh, and they didn't stop there. They piled on. They also said, Mr. Allen, he questioned whether he should get the vaccine or not. They came after him for that. Is that right, Mr. Levitt?
Yes.
And then they went after his faith. Direct attack on the First Amendment. Because he's a Christian, because he's a Catholic, because he takes his faith seriously, oh my goodness, we got to take his security clearance away from him, even though he served our country, decorated Marine, and held a security clearance for 20 years. That sure looks political to me, Inspector General Horowitz. Does it look political to you?
Well, Congressman, as I said earlier, we've seen issues with the FBI and how it's treated whistleblowers, frankly, across the spectrum. And I agree with you, it's very concerning that would be done here.
We know they're political because while all this is going on, they used the questionnaire. Isn't that right, Mr. Levitt? Isn't that right? They used this questionnaire to people they wanted to snitch on folks like Marcus Allen. They gave him a questionnaire.
Those were used in the case of a handful of employees, and I know that Mr. Horowitz's office is looking at that. I think it's important to note that the questionnaire wasn't the only thing, right? That these questions were asked across
I'm talking
the board.
about the way they piled on to go after Mr. Allen and keep his security clearance and keep his pay from him for 27 months. And they did the same thing to Garrett O'Boyle. And what that has meant, as you indicated in your testimony, what that has meant to his family and Mr. O'Boyle's family. And this questionnaire said, did anyone ever vocalize support for President Trump? All right, you're allowed to say things about the President of the United States when you work in the FBI, aren't you, Mr. Horowitz?
I'm sorry.
You're allowed to say you support a president. You're allowed to say that in the FBI.
Absolutely, those questions are highly inappropriate.
And you're allowed to decide what kind of health decisions you're going to make with your own body, right?
Correct.
Those shouldn't be grounds for saying you're somehow disloyal to the country, but that's what they did. Highly inappropriate questions being asked of witnesses during security clearance investigations. That's your testimony, right, Mr. Horowitz?
That's correct.
And he got reinstated just recently. Marcus Allen you got reinstated, right, Marcus?
Yes, sir.
Why haven't they given you your money?
I am not aware why it's taking them 4 months to cut a check for all the back pay. I have no idea why it's taking that long.
They put you through pure hell for 27 months, falsely accused you. They go through the process. 4 people get reassigned because they agree with you, but the politics of Mr. Beltry, who, oh, by the way, as Mr. Levitt pointed out, is now running the second assassination investigation on President Trump in Miami. I find that just astonishing. And they won't pay you.
Right, we're still waiting for the payout.
When was the final agreement? When was the final settlement with the FBI? What was the date, Mr. Levitt?
June 1st.
Well, they've had time. Doesn't take that long to write a check, for goodness sake. So he's still in waiting. That's how our FBI treats a good man who has served our country for 20 plus years. It's ridiculous. And yet the Democrats say there's no weaponization. You got to be kidding me. My time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
So you want to talk about weaponization of the Department of Justice? Let's talk about it. Because sadly for Republicans, weaponization tends to be in the eye of the beholder. They delight in talking about false allegations of politicized attacks on Republicans, but I want to talk about the real weaponization, the one that would come from a second Trump-led Department of Justice. We are already watching in horror as women across the country lose their autonomy, their dignity, and even their lives because of draconian abortion bans in dozens of states, which Trump delights in, he brags about choosing the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. And if we get into a second Trump presidency, the weaponization we are witnessing will be orchestrated by the DOJ at Trump's demand. Trump's Project 2025 mandate for leadership calls for some of the most restrictive abortion and healthcare bans imaginable. In short, it lays out the path to eradicate reproductive health care and women's privacy. It calls for the CDC and HHS to closely monitor and report on individual women's health and abortions, keeping track of when women travel across state lines to seek reproductive health care and at what stage of their pregnancy they're in when they do. And alarmingly, it calls for the DOJ to criminally punish abortion providers who distribute abortion medication through the mail. Mr. Kirshner, one of the proposals I mentioned is for the CDC to track women's movements to access abortions across state lines. The mandate also calls for the president to be able to direct the investigations and litigation by the FBI and the DOJ. So hypothetically, even though that CDC-related part of the proposal didn't mention DOJ prosecutions, there are risks that a far-right government outlined in Trump's Project 2025, collecting that data, could weaponize it against the women seeking health care in a criminal context. Is that correct? So in other words, it would be possible to take CDC data about women who have sought abortions and direct the DOJ and the FBI to target those individuals. Is that correct?
It is, yes. Tracking women who are pregnant, it's horribly reminiscent of, tracking and hunting animals. It really
It's like stalking.
It endangers people.
It's like stalking, let's be honest. Tracking the movements of women. The mandate also calls for the enforcement of restrictions on DOJ grants to comply with conservative ideology, such as prohibiting sanctuary cities from receiving federal funding. Would it be possible then that DOJ grants could be conditioned on jurisdictions limiting abortion or other healthcare access?
Under Project 2025, it seems like the sky is the limit.
Thank you. These extreme restrictions are far from the only alarming agenda points in Trump's Project 2025. The document also calls for dismantling the Department of Education, which former President Trump claimed he would do during a rally in Pennsylvania just this week. It calls for allowing businesses to discriminate against protected classes. It calls for reversal of the LGBTQ+ equity focus of the Biden administration. And if any of these proposals were to be challenged in court, Trump's corrupt Justice Department, led by loyalists, would defend these awful provisions. Mr. Kirshner, if any of these offensive proposals are challenged, they will be defended by the Department of Justice. What could be the result if the DOJ is more loyal to President Trump than to the Constitution?
They could decline to take up challenges, or they could decide to take up challenges not based on the rule of law, not based on, what is right for the American people, but based on the whims and preferences of a president.
And Mr. Horowitz, my final question is for you. Would we want agents at the FBI or any other government agency who would be seeking to promote any cause that might conflict with the Constitution, whether that be religious or ideological or loyalty to an individual rather than the Constitution?
We would not. We swear our employees in with an oath to abide by the Constitution, the laws of this country.
So does it seem like a great idea to scrap our complete civil service and pack every federal agency with people that are loyal more to an individual than to the Constitution, or more to religious ideology, or more to some other kind of ideology?
I think over the years, Congress has found where the appropriate balance is between having non-career officials and political appointees leading agencies on policy issues and having a career civil service.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
President Trump has never read Project 2025, much less adopted it. Unlike the viewpoint adopted by the sitting vice president, which is that we should have taxpayer-funded sex change operations for illegal aliens in prison. And I try to be a little open-minded when I hear a provocative argument, and I just sort of wonder, when would I be in favor of taxpayer-funded sex change operations for the illegal aliens? And maybe if it was mandatory. Maybe if it wasn't optional, but mandatory, it would be a pretty substantial deterrent at the border. But to the matter at hand, Mr. Allen, it's good to see you again. You came last year and you told us about these terrible things the Department of Justice was doing to you. And you've testified today, you still don't think the Department of Justice has treated whistleblowers like yourself and others fairly. Is that your testimony?
That's correct. The treatment is unfair.
Do you agree with that assessment, Mr. Horowitz?
As I said in my testimony, Congressman, I think putting someone like Mr. Allen on unpaid leave for 2+ years is unfair while you're trying to adjudicate.
Yeah, no, I get
that. There needs to be a process here that
well,
happens promptly.
The process was to punish these people and to make an example of them. That's obvious to everyone. They saw improper actions at the FBI and DOJ. They blew the whistle on it, and then the process was the punishment, and it was the point. I think that's how Mr. Allen feels, is it?
Correct. The process in this instance definitely felt like the punishment.
Yeah, so they've done it to you. They've done it to others. Mr. Horowitz says it shouldn't have been done. And so now I want to be a little reflective about this with Congress. Mr. Allen, you've seen since you have given us this testimony, us continue to pass continuing resolutions that put no consequence on the DOJ or the FBI for what they've done to you and your colleagues. Do you think Congress has appropriately protected whistleblowers?
I do not, Congressman, and I think the policy recommendations can be put forward that there can be bipartisan support for to protect whistleblowers going forward in the future.
Absolutely. I mean this in no way as a partisan critique. Matter of fact, it's a bipartisan critique that we all own. Because we see the evidence that you get mistreated. We hear from the experts like Mr. Horowitz that this is totally off book. It's obvious to anyone with a brain they're doing it to hurt you and to make an example out of you. And what do? We just sign the check and we just send it over. You know what we should put in any continuing resolution? That until you get paid and until the rest of the whistleblowers get their back pay, maybe the FBI director doesn't get his paycheck. Maybe the attorney general shouldn't get his paycheck. Maybe the FBI director shouldn't get the use of the private jet that he likes to fly around the country on so much. You know, they enjoy all of the accoutrements of their position, and you end up screwed. And we're okay with it, apparently. Any member who votes for these continuing resolutions is voting to perpetuate the punishment that has been instituted on the whistleblowers. And while we want to talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department, rightfully so, we write the check for it, and we underwrite the debt for it. And it is sickening to me. Mr. Horowitz, I got a few questions for you since we got you here. Now, the CIGI is the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, right?
That's right.
And you're the past chair?
I was the chair from 2015 through 2020.
Does it have any binding legal authority?
In terms of, I mean, it was created by Congress as an agency.
Yeah, but does it have like legal authority to issue subpoenas that it can compel?
It has not been given subpoena authority.
Okay, so what I wonder is where this group SIGI, I'll just call it the Integrity Committee, like what happens when they start interfering in the work of IGs to expose corruption? Who adjudicates that?
So Congress actually created the Integrity Committee again back in 2008, gave it its authorities. The Integrity Committee puts forth a set of policies and procedures. It's required to provide them to Congress. That's the mechanism.
Yeah, but in a state of conflict, right, where you got an IG working to expose corruption, and then you've got the SIGI hassling the IG, who resolves that?
Well,
because I mean, nobody in the SIGI is not, the head of it's not like confirmed by the Senate, but IGs are confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah, and it probably in part depends on, there are two types of IGs. There's presidentially nominated Senate-confirmed IGs, there's then agency IGs. For presidentially nominated Senate-confirmed IGs, ultimately it's up to the president to decide what he wants, because the report goes to the president.
And the presidential power, not to get into a constitutional, a regression here, but the presidential power is vested in the IG, not in this administrative committee, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Connolly, but would you indulge me to just clarify something?
Certainly.
Inspector Horowitz, you are Senate confirmed and you were the head of SIGI, is that correct?
Correct.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Yeah, I was Senate confirmed for DOJ IG.
Right.
I think the point was that the chair of SIGI doesn't have to be Senate confirmed. I happen to be Senate confirmed sitting in that position.
Thank you. I just want to make that clear. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Kirshner, and by the way, I apologize, at least on behalf of this side of the committee, for a disparagement characterizing your testimony. I don't think we should ever do that in a committee. We don't have to agree.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. I'm from New Jersey, so I've suffered worse.
I'm from Boston originally. We don't like that. Mr. Kirshner, Mr. Levitt's client, Garrett O'Brien, posted the names and personally identifying information, including parts of home addresses, for 4 current or former FBI officials. In August, Kyle Seraphim, who has hosted multiple podcasts with Mr. O'Boyle, tweeted, and I quote, "The people who left Garrett O'Boyle's family and my family homeless should experience what guys like us are prepared to do to evil," unquote. Mr. Kirshner, you served in the FBI. What's wrong with identifying FBI officials' partial addresses, hometowns, personal information, and making a threat? You may justify it because you think they're engaged in evil, but that's a direct threat from the way I read it. What could go wrong with that kind of thing? And isn't that the kind of threat of violence that I think, ought to be examined by a weaponization committee as opposed to what we're doing here today? Your view?
Yes, sir, thank you. So I wasn't with the FBI, though. I was with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, right up the street there. But I'll tell you, I worked closely with the FBI, the Washington field office, directly across the street from my former office. And, we moved heaven and earth to prevent personal information from getting out about our witnesses, about people we were investigating, so as they, to prevent them from being unfairly, perhaps, smeared with an investigation that didn't result in an indictment. And, I had my fair share of witnesses killed in Washington, D.C., because their information got out, they were labeled as snitches, and then I had to sit with the families of a witness and talk about, how very sorry I was for what happened to them because that information
So while we're bemoaning the alleged mistreatment of certain individuals, including some here today, which may not be true, we're escalating it with actual threats that could lead to violence, even death. Is that correct?
You endanger the lives of folks when you put that kind of information out into the public square.
Certain irony when we're worried about weaponization, while meanwhile some of the people we purport to be advocating for are engaged in this kind of activity threatening FBI agents. Mr. Horowitz, there have been allegations made that the FBI has weaponized security clearance revocations to target and root out conservatives at the Bureau. Have you found any such evidence of a broad pattern of trying to target conservatives and revoking their security clearances?
We have not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians?
We have not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that the FBI leadership is targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that Jeffrey Veltri, now the special agent in charge of FBI's Miami field office, was biased against conservatives?
We haven't made any findings with regard to Mr. Veltri.
And have you made any findings that the FBI wrongly revoked the clearance of former special agent Garrett O'Boyle?
I'm not going to speak to any particular case because we have matters ongoing, and so as I'm answering those questions, I'm talking about what we've done as of today.
We'll stipulate that, but would it be fair to summarize your answers to the previous questions? You haven't found any pattern of ideological or religious bias by the FBI with respect to those issues. Is that correct?
That is correct. What we found, as I mentioned earlier, in our past work is, frankly, issues on occasion with FBI and, frankly, other law enforcement agencies and other parts of the department acting inappropriately with regard to whistleblowers.
That's different than a pattern.
That's different than a pattern.
That's different than a pattern. Finally, Mr. Kirchner, as a child of the 60s, I find it almost humorous to hear characterizations of the FBI as this hotbed of liberal, if not leftist, ideology. I'm going to give you the last word on that. It seems to me the FBI has always been a fairly conservative culture and certainly a right-of-center political bent if there was one. What's your view?
Yes, sir, and I had a lot of knockdown, drag-out discussions with lots of FBI agents over the course of the course of an investigation, whether we should indict, who we should indict, what we should indict, but I never believed any of it was born of politics or their ideological beliefs or preferences. It never was, in my experience. That's why I find this topic a little curious.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'll now recognize myself. Inspector Horowitz, would it be fair to characterize you as one of the institutionalists of the IG, long-serving, and a career that, without patting yourself overly on the back, but deservedly, that has been about promoting the responsible behavior of the IG and the performance of their duty?
Congressman, that's certainly how I viewed myself. My responsibilities through my time here as IG.
Well, that's how this committee and other committees of the Congress view you for your years of service, and I want to thank you. This is a difficult hearing because many people perhaps would like to make this not about weaponization. But in your many years of experience, the personal actions of individuals, for whatever reason, including an unstated bias, leads to bad conduct, including HR wrongdoing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one of the hardest jobs we have, as you know from the work you've worked on, I've worked on, is understanding and figuring out motives.
And you often never know the motive. You only know that the action was inconsistent with policy, law, and the like.
That's correct, but we do our best, for example, in the Fast and Furious work, the FISA work, others, to look at as much email, text messages, instant messages, et cetera, to try and understand whether there was evidence of motive or what the evidence of motive was.
So leaving motive out for a moment, in the case of the way the pulling and withholding of these clearances was done, is that clearly inconsistent with policy, procedures, tradition, and the fair treatment of an employee?
Actually, it actually was somewhat, in many ways, consistent with the policies, practice, and procedures, which is why I think there are several policy issues that are important to talk about in terms of reforms, and I know the submissions here have raised some of them.
So, you're an attorney in addition to other things. The law is not always about fairness.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And would you characterize that this is an example where, even if marginally supported by law and regulation, it is by no means a fair way to treat somebody?
I agree. I think, as I've said, it was consistent with policy to allow someone like Mr. Allen to be out of his job on unpaid leave for more than 2 years and try and fight that process.
So not only does Congress need to find a way to prevent these unfairness, but we also suffer from the fact that this can be done for no reason or for an unknown reason. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think that is some of the key policy issues that are here before all of you, which is Mr. Allen had an ability to challenge this, as limited as it was, because he was alleging a whistleblower retaliation. He wouldn't have that same opportunity but for the fact he was alleging retaliation for whistleblowing.
Mr. Issa, can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Mr. Horowitz is talking about the procedures of protecting, so going through and appealing. But I think it's important to remember that substantively, this whole process started because Mr. Allen made a protected disclosure, and several of the things in Mr. Horowitz.
And I want to get to that. Going back to whistleblower retaliation, under the intent of our whistleblower statute, we intend to protect a whistleblower normally from all retaliation, including any loss of pay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So had the agency made what would have been a finding of whistleblower on the front end, notwithstanding, whistleblowers don't have to be right. They just have to be whistleblowers. Had they made the finding that was clear, then he would not have lost a day's pay because they would have treated the pay in some way as a whistleblower.
Right. As long as they thought he had a reasonable belief in what he said, they should not have taken a personnel action against him.
Okay, so in a little bit of a circular item here, and again, I'm staying away from motive for a moment. Certainly the tools were available to not deny him 1 day of pay, and ultimately the resolution is someday in the future, not yet, not after 4 months, he will get made whole in theory in pay, but in fact, it never had to be that way, and the judgment used in this case is suspect.
Yeah, and that is exactly why, Congressman, we put out the management alert we did, to point out the fact that you don't need to put someone on unpaid leave while you review an allegation against the person. You can find other opportunities for them, other positions they can continue to work in, even if you think they shouldn't have the clearance.
Thank you. Thanks for making that clear. We now go to Congresswoman Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses. So once again, MAGA Republicans are here talking about something that quite frankly seems to just be made up. And I think I want to just stick to talking, Mr. Kirchner, because I know you've already talked some about Project 2025, and we've talked about several aspects of it. But one thing that has caught my eye, of course, is that Project 2025 is filled with anti-immigrant proposals that will continue to perpetuate cycles of racist policies, unnecessary inhumane detentions of human beings, and ineffective and dangerous border policies. The project calls to dismantle asylum, to militarize our border, that's at page 555, and also to pursue the promulgation of every rule related to immigration that was issued during the Trump administration, that's at page 568, and to challenge any checks and balances against the president's authority over immigration, page 568. So once again, he wants complete authority, and he being Donald Trump. The project's mandate for leadership takes particularly aim at sanctuary cities. You know, one of the things about sanctuary cities that is always mentioned is that victims of crime that happen to be immigrants, you know, feel comfortable in being able to complain or if they're witnesses to a crime. So, Mr. Kirchner, you've served as a prosecutor for 30 years. I've been a lawyer and a judge. We understand the importance of law and order and holding violent criminals accountable. So what would be the dangers if this mandate were to go into effect and they would attempt to end sanctuary cities? You know, the bigger question is there's no definition of sanctuary cities. It's all a label that's been used for years. What would this do to the crime rate in some of our cities?
You know, I think it could potentially increase it. If you deter people from reporting that they have been victims of violent crime for fear of what will happen to them if they report that victimization, all you're doing is creating an enormous class of folk who are going to continue to be victimized, and that can grow. Maybe they will then commit crimes themselves because the whole thing begins to operate outside the rule of law. So, you know, I think, you know, those kind of approaches present real challenges and could increase crime when it sounds like it's designed to decrease crime.
So instead of getting rid of gangs, they'll probably create the formation of more gangs.
It could, and you know, and I see also in Project 2025 on page 555 that it recommends that they use active duty military personnel to enforce civilian law, which I remember being taught in Army law school years ago. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. So, you know, none of this seems to be all that well thought out.
Right, and then another priority in the mandate's proposal for the Department of Justice, my colleagues, especially Representative Lynch, have already alluded to all this. The mandate reads, and I'll read it again because it's worth repeating. It's at page 569. The next conservative administration must make every effort to obtain the resources to support a vast expansion of the number of appointees in every office and component across the department, especially in the Civil Rights Division, the FBI, and the Executive Office for Immigration Review. So just a complete dismantling of those offices. So in essence, this proposal is to strip the department, including the immigration enforcement, of career civil servants who, of course, you know, would lead probably, you know, if they're concerned about Mr. Allen not having, you know, 2 years of pay, which of course I agree it's concerning. But imagine people who are loyal not to the rule of law, not loyal to the Constitution, have no guidelines because it's all been dismantled. They could probably, anyone that appears before them, they could probably suspend all of them for 2 years and give them no pay because there would be no rules. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and if you have supervisors who are not, you know, making decisions based on the rule of law, the facts and the evidence, but political considerations, you know, my supervisors could tell me, you know, investigate this crime, don't investigate that crime. And if that, you know, determination is not based exclusively on the facts and the law and the victim and the protection of the community, we're gonna get in real trouble.
So a case like Mr. Allen could be multiplied into thousands if there's no rules and no regulation, and there wouldn't be an inspector general
It
to
could be.
review anything.
And let me go on record as saying I support whistleblowers.
Absolutely.
And retaliation against them needs to be stamped out. So
Absolutely.
I just, you know, we have this thing called an adoptive admission. So when somebody says I believe or don't believe something, I just feel compelled to put on the record what I actually believe.
Right. Well, thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Inspector General Horowitz, over the past 3 years, I've questioned FBI Director Wray and Attorney General Merrick Garland about the federal assets, such as confidential human sources that were present on January 6th at the Capitol. And they have continuously stonewalled me. We've got no answers whatsoever about this from them. Now, you announced that you were going to do a review of the DOJ response and preparation, mainly preparation, I think, for January 6th. When did you start that review? When did you announce that review?
We announced it in 2021, but we ended up pausing it because of the ongoing criminal cases consistent with how we perform our work. We reinitiated it last year, and I'm in the process of reviewing a draft of the report.
So 3.5 years ago, it was announced that you'd be doing this review, and we still don't have the review, do we?
No, as I said, the reason is we paused the review because of the ongoing criminal work that would, consistent with our practice, we don't interfere with ongoing criminal investigations.
So, but now that you've restarted it, do you have evidence of the number of confidential human sources that were operating on the Capitol grounds on January 6th?
Our report will include the information in that regard.
Can you tell us today how many there were? Were there more than 100?
I'm not in a position to say that, both because it's in draft form and we have not gone through the classification review. And so I need to be careful on what I say.
So we're 4 years in. The reason to do these reports, I think, is so we don't make this, if there were any mistakes, not to make the same mistakes again, but we are just weeks away from an inauguration. We're 4 years, almost 4 years into this report. When is it going to be released?
It's certainly my hope and expectation, although I don't control this entirely because it has to go through a classification review, but certainly in the next couple of months is my hope.
Do you think, is there any consideration for the election about the release of this report? Would you delay it in order to not release it right before the election?
At this point, given the process that has to play out in terms of classification review and all of that, I'm not making any, I don't have to make any judgment about that. We're still, that still has to go on. Just to give you a sense of it, when I did the Pfizer review,
you're saying it's not even going to be done in time for before the election?
it doesn't, I doubt it would be done in time for the election.
Is it going to be done before the inauguration?
That is certainly my hope.
It's your hope. We're 4 years into it, and we know what we do know is you're going to expose that there were confidential human sources at the Capitol. Can you tell us today how many went into the Capitol?
I'll have that information in the report. I'm not able to speak to information in there, both because it's in draft and we get a response from the department and the FBI,
Okay.
but also because I don't know yet what's classified and not classified.
So if they broke the law, if they went into the Capitol, which we pretty much know there were confidential human sources who went into the Capitol and right there alongside of everybody else, wouldn't they need to follow DOJ CHS protocols, and do you know if those were followed?
They should follow CHS protocols, and again, we'll include that information in the report.
Do you know how many were reimbursed for travel?
As I sit here, I don't recall the number. But
I
wouldn't
recall, or you won't tell us?
Well, and if I did know it, I wouldn't be in a position to tell you because we still have to go through.
We're 4 years
actual
into this. You're supposed to be the organization that goes and gets these answers when the FBI and the DOJ stonewall Congress. But I feel like, we're 4 years into this. We're not even going to get this information you're telling us now before the election, and maybe not even before the next inauguration. How would we make any corrections or without that information? I want to move on to something else. We've got FBI's failed investigation of the January 6th pipe bomb. Are you looking into that at all?
We've had discussion, I know, Congressman, about it, and we have followed up, and I can speak to you about that.
I mean, they keep saying it's an ongoing investigation, but they've got no leads, no suspects. They've lost information. They've lost evidence. They can't find evidence. Secret Service deleted all of its texts on January 6th. Steve D'Antuono, the guy in charge of Washington, D.C. field office, says that the cell phone data that could have been used to find the bomber was corrupted. And now we just found out, I found out from another inspector general, and I want to submit this for the record.
Without objection.
Yeah. I asked him, do you have the footage, the video footage of the DNC on January 6th? And he tells me when he asked the FBI for the video footage, they don't even have video footage of the DNC that we know was created on January 6th. It's almost, so it's almost as if they don't want to know. Can you rule out that there were any confidential human sources involved in the whole pipe bomb thing on January 6th?
I'd have to go back, Congressman, and refresh myself on what information we've gathered to date on that. I don't know as I sit here.
Okay, that would be a huge revelation.
But I'm happy to come.
I think we should get that and get it public before the election. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'm just struck by the irony, the fact that the very email that they went after Mr. Allen about was on this subject, and we're not going to get an answer to it until after the election, potentially after the inauguration. I find the irony astounding. And it's not Mr. Horowitz's fault. It's the folks of the Justice Department who are taking their time with this report. I appreciate the gentleman's question. Now yield to the gentleman from New York or California?
John, you want
California.
me to go?
New York, excuse me. I'll do whatever Ms. Plaskett says. Okay, New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we are again for another hearing about the same topic. And I want to say I appreciate the concerns about how the FBI addresses and investigates whistleblowers or retaliates against whistleblowers. And we've had a number of hearings on this in this committee. And Mr. Horowitz, I'm glad you are looking into it. That is your job, and that's what you should do. But let's be real. This is the weaponization of the federal government subcommittee. Whistleblower retaliation is peanuts compared to a future president using the power of his office to imprison his political adversaries simply because they oppose him. That is the ultimate weaponization of the federal government. And we don't have to question whether or not Donald Trump will do this in the future because we know how this story plays out. We've seen it, and he's done it in the past. I want to introduce an article from last Sunday's New York Times entitled, "As President Trump demanded investigations of foes, he often got them. He has threatened to target his perceived enemies if elected again. A look at his time in the White House shows how readily he could do so." Let's just go through some of the things that Donald Trump did when he was president the first time. James Comey testified that Trump asked him for a pledge of loyalty and then requested that Comey drop the investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Comey refused. Trump fired him. Trump also fired Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe because he oversaw an investigation that Donald Trump didn't like, just days before McCabe would have earned his full retirement pension. Trump then demanded that the IRS investigate Comey and McCabe, among others. Well, that's not all. At Trump's direction, the Justice Department dropped its case against former National Security Advisor Flynn, who had pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Mr. Kirshner, in your 30 years of experience, are you aware of any other situation where the Department of Justice withdrew a case after a defendant had admitted to the conduct under oath in court?
I am not.
Let's move on. Donald Trump pressured overtly the DOJ to reverse its sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone. After Stone threatened to cooperate against Donald Trump, Trump granted him clemency. John Durham wasted millions of dollars on a baseless and fruitless investigation into the origins of the Russia investigation because Donald Trump demanded it. And it got so bad that Mr. Durham's number 2 resigned in protest to Durham's plan, pressured by Bill Barr and Donald Trump, to publish an interim report on the investigation shortly before the 2020 election in gross violation of DOJ policies. That's not all. Trump tried to install Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General because he acknowledged to the president that he would do his bidding and fraudulently try to help him overturn the election. But this is the one that really gets to the nub of this. And Mr. Levitt, we're talking about First Amendment, infringement on First Amendment rights that you are alleging has happened to these FBI agents. You would agree, would you not, that writing a book is protected speech under the First Amendment?
Sure.
So let me just give you a hypothetical scenario. Somebody pleads guilty to a crime. He's sentenced and designated to serve his sentence at home. He is asked by the Department of Justice to sign an agreement saying that he would not write a book. He refuses to do that. As a result of his refusal, the Department of Justice throws him back into jail in solitary confinement. Is that, in your mind, the weaponization of the Department of Justice to infringe upon First Amendment rights?
I'm not a First Amendment lawyer, Mr. Goldman.
Well, you said this is all about a First Amendment infringement.
Well,
why are you testifying about that if you're not an expert? The answer, because my time is running out, excuse me, the answer, because my time is running out, is that actually happened by Donald Trump to Michael Cohen. A judge intervened immediately, reversed the decision because it's a gross violation of the First Amendment. It is a gross abuse of power of the Department of Justice, and Mr. Cohen was let out. But this is who now has complete immunity to do this as much as he wants without the guardrails of Don McGahn or John Kelly to stop him from doing it. This is going to be the danger of the weaponization of the federal government. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, your office published advisory memo 24-067 entitled The Justice Department's Compliance with Whistleblower Protections for Employees with Security Clearance, and noted how you found that the DOJ was not in compliance with whistleblower protections for employees with a clearance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What policies exactly did the DOJ fail to follow?
So the law requires for suspension and revocations of security clearance that the department have an appeal process allowing, after 1 year of suspension, to come to the Inspector General and appeal that process. That was not in place at the time.
Does it concern you that the DOJ, that certain DOJ components like the FBI indefinitely suspend employees without pay for the duration of a security investigation and review process?
It does, which is one of the issues we also raised in that management memo.
What is the average length of time for one of those investigations?
So we found in the report that for the 106 employees that we looked at over a 5-year period who had been suspended for more than 6 months, that the average was 527 days. So about 17 and a half months.
So about a year and a half, roughly.
Year and a half.
So in your work, have you seen similar delays or similar lengths of time in other agencies?
We have within the department in other components, law enforcement components.
What concerns me too, at least with the pay issue, the DOJ and FBI's current policy forces employees to remain in kind of an indefinite state of limbo without pay.
That's exactly right, and that is the concern, Congressman, that goes actually beyond whistleblowers. Mr. Allen ultimately was able to get a settlement because he was a whistleblower alleging retaliation, but that same issue applies to people who don't have a whistleblower claim but have nonetheless had their security clearance pulled.
I just think it's remarkable to me, I mean, just to hear Mr. Allen's testimony earlier about what he and his family went through. Pulling out retirement, life savings, things like that, just to stay afloat. And fortunately for him, he was able to settle, but he's he might be the exception and not the rule. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Most people, or many people we've seen, have resigned or retired rather than wait 2+ years.
Can I add one clarification on the settlement? It was not because of his whistleblower claim, or the settlement's related to that, but the restoration of his security clearance was because of just an appeal of the revocation. So that was not tied to the whistleblower claim or to the settlement for the back pay. The FBI explicitly said, we're not giving you back this clearance just because there's some settlement. They make an independent security determination. They determined he was entitled to it.
Correct.
Thank you. Furthermore, the memo found that DOJ policy doesn't hold the legal requirement to the extent practical that permits an individual to retain their employment status while their security clearance is in review. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does the DOJ's failure to follow this policy concern you?
It does, which is what led us to issue the management alert. The department did respond and has since changed its policies so that there is that 1-year appeal. The other thing that they've done, which is not required currently, but is certainly something that I think Congress should consider, is requiring components, department law enforcement components in particular, to consider whether there are paid jobs people can be in without the clearances, even if a clearance suspension is warranted, so that you don't have this situation where someone gets put out unpaid leave or paid leave not working either, which has been another problem, by the way, at the department over the years, is putting people on paid leave for extended periods of time, so they're getting a paycheck without having to work.
Based on your office's findings, do you think that the senior leadership within the DOJ or the FBI were aware that their policies did not follow federal legal standards?
I actually, my sense is they were not aware, because when we started this process and went to them, they did not seem to know about this issue, or weren't aware that their policy fell short on that issue, I should say.
Your office made 4 recommendations to the DOJ to address the concerns cited in your memo. 1, what were those for the record? And 2, to your knowledge, what steps has the DOJ taken to implement those recommendations?
So the 4 recommendations were: 1, to make sure there was this 1-year appeal process; 2, to notify employees of their right to this process, because obviously you can have a process, but you shouldn't have to have an employee rummage through a lot of policies to find it. 3rd, when there is a suspension, look to see if there are positions they can go into where they can continue to maintain their position while performing work, even without the suspension, if that's the plan. And then 4th, put in place a review to make sure that these are being done timely. And so, because you don't want a situation either where if they can find another job with a security clearance suspension pulled, that they somehow indefinitely stay in that other job. You want them to have that resolved. If they shouldn't be in the job, they should leave, right? Then if it was an unfair suspension, they should be put back to their old job.
And have they taken those recommendations?
They have. Those? And I think very importantly is the requirement that they report regularly to department leadership as to why that hasn't occurred in a timely way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the witnesses, thank you for your testimony. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. Most of the focus has been on the Department of Justice, as is appropriate. But most of this is history. My concern is tomorrow. My concern is what might be in our future. Project 2025 is a roadmap that the Republican administration may use should Trump win the election. And in Project 2025, there are many things to be concerned about, most of which happen to do with the weaponization of the government, the whole of government, to carry out an agenda. I want to focus on one part of Project 2025, which really hasn't been discussed much, but really should be paid attention to. And that is the redesign of our national security apparatus, putting all senior military officers and career intelligence officers through a loyalty test, and what that might mean for our nation should that come to pass. We can debate whether it would come to pass or not. The election will have something to do with that, but also the willingness or the unwillingness of the new administration to undertake that. What would a loyalty test mean for the military? It wouldn't be their ability to conduct the necessary programs for our national defense, but rather their loyalty to the president and the president's agenda, which may or may not have anything to do with national security. We have some history here that might be useful. For example, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would not carry out President Trump's political agenda. Certainly willing to carry out the military national security agenda, but not the military agenda. And that earned Chief of Staff General Mark Milley the opportunity for the president to call for his execution. Now, if Project 2025 is the roadmap for the Trump administration, and the Trump administration demands a loyalty test for our senior military generals, colonels, and career intelligence officers, what does that mean for the nation? Posse comitatus is often used, but I believe this committee has from time to time taken a look at the emergency powers of the president, which basically can waive nearly every law. So we may wind up, given Project 2025 and the loyalty tests that seem to be embedded in it, with a military that is capable of involvement in domestic affairs, and an intelligence community that's supposed to be looking outside of this nation, involved domestically. So the combination of the current very long list of emergency powers that the president has, together with a loyal military hierarchy and a loyal career intelligence community that is loyal to the president, not necessarily loyal to the Constitution or to the history of our democracy. What could it mean to our nation? A military that is used domestically for political purposes? An intelligence community that is looking inward? Project 2025 presents a very serious challenge. 5 seconds. I'd like all of you to ponder what this would mean. Is it a problem? Mr. Kirshner.
It is, and what I'm reminded of, Representative, is after I graduated law school and I was sent to Army Law School, the JAG school on the campus of the University of Virginia, one thing that was drilled into our heads is you must obey lawful orders, but equally important, I would say more important, you must disobey unlawful orders. Project 2025 would wipe out that second command, which is more important than the first command, and the danger can't be overstated.
I appreciate the forbearance of the chair for that 25 seconds.
Gentleman's time, the gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
I thank the chairman. It's disappointing that we need this hearing. Mr. Allen, I want to apologize for what's happened to you. Our country should treat you better.
Thank you for the apology.
Thank you for your long career of service to our country, and I just wanted to ask, your experience spans a couple decades, and so over your time in service to our country, just confined to the FBI, what kind of changes? I think the perception back home is the rank and file people at the FBI are people that we want to be there, that we want to support, and frankly, there's not a lot of trust in the current leadership system. And when you ask questions, a lot of my constituents had the exact same questions, and others did. So thank you for taking the courage to just ask an honest question. And the way that that was treated is shameful. And we're here today in part because of that. And frankly, Mr. Horowitz is continuing a 3-4 year long, hopefully imminent, report that answers the exact same question. So how have you seen the FBI change as someone who moved up through the ranks?
I would say that, unfortunately, in my experience, with the culture at the FBI, it's very easy for leaders there to kind of impose their wills on their subordinates. It's a culture where there are a lot of careerists and blue flamers who'll do what they need to climb up the charts and the ladders. And if that includes burning other agents or subordinate employees to get to where they want to get in the organization, whether that's for power or money concerns, that's something I've observed in the culture of the FBI since I started there in 2008 as a contractor, worked for a couple of years, and then I got on officially with the Charlotte field office in late 2015. So I'd like to say that this is, from my personal experience, a sea change, but from what I've seen, there have always been vain careerists within the organization who will destroy people in order to climb the charts.
So safe to say we're not always promoting the best and brightest.
I would concur with that statement.
How do we need to change the culture to get it back on track?
I think there needs to be more accountability, and there needs to be a high focus on moral and ethical behavior within the organization. And I think outside checks and balances via policy change where the Bureau isn't allowed to simply just review their own conduct, to truly have an external watchdog force that can actually cause punitive change and enact measures in the organization. I think that's a big part of it. That's what I would advocate for. But I know a lot of the folks that join the FBI, they get into it, and it's not quite what they expected once they get on the inside. So there's a lot of cultural change just from the historical culture of the place that has to change. And I'd like to tell you that I'm shocked that this is where the FBI has come today. But frankly, I'm not shocked at all that this kind of lawless conduct could have occurred within the walls of the organization.
Yeah, sad, but I've heard it from many other people, and frankly, you felt the blunt end of it. And again, hopefully we can make this right swiftly, and you serve out a good career there. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Mr. Horowitz, in another way, you've done things that my constituents appreciate. You've provided oversight and accountability, and the oversight and accountability function of Congress seems to work. The public finds out about all kinds of things, but they're just so frustrated because at the end of the day, Congress just shuts up and cuts the check. We don't provide reform. We don't provide accountability. Instead, you see people like Mr. Veltri promoted, somewhat validating Mr. Allen's observations, and trusted, as it turns out, with critical investigations. I mean, we saw the FBI. I hope there's an investigation underway on the events in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. Is there an active Inspector General overview of that?
I actually don't have jurisdiction over that. My understanding is the DHS Inspector General.
Inspector General Kufari does. And as SIGI, the Integrity Committee, you formally directed that. They've tried to target people, even as Inspector Generals. Did you feel sometimes limited or coerced because of how SIGI has changed their behavior over the years?
Yeah, let me just say, I was the chair of SIGI, not the chair of the Integrity Committee, and by law, that
is separate.
Distinction, Congress has separated those two, but the Integrity Committee is part of SIGI. Look, I've dealt with issues at the Integrity Committee. I think there are improvements that certainly need and can be made, both internally and through legislative action, that would improve the process. But I do think, and I've worked with folks there, that they have tried to exercise their responsibilities, the chair of the as members of the Integrity Committee, as best they could.
Well, one thing we absolutely have to do is we have to change the way it's funded. Right now, they're harvesting cash from other agencies, including extra money. And so Congress needs to take action, in particular with funding. My time has expired, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I'll pick up maybe a little bit where my colleague just left off, and the question was about Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm curious to know if any of you are aware as to whether or not the FBI is involved at all in determining what's going on in Springfield, Ohio, because as far as I'm concerned, there is domestic terrorism afoot, and it is at the word of the Republican nominee and his running mate. So do we know if anyone is checking into that on the federal level? I'm just curious. Just a yes or no, anybody?
I don't know.
Okay, perfect. Either way, I want to move on, and I want to talk about Mr. Kirshner. I'm just curious, if you were to define what weaponization of the federal government looks like, just in a quick, short definition, what would it be?
Using the Department of Justice to reward your friends and your criminal associates by delivering pardons after they'd been convicted by juries or before their case was even concluded or before their case was even charged, and conversely using the Department of Justice to punish your perceived enemies, order investigations and prosecutions, even if they're not warranted by evidence. I'm sorry that was not brief.
That's okay. It was accurate. Because that's how I see weaponization as well, and it's something that we saw a lot out of Trump specifically, because all of his friends were going to prison, and he's probably got more friends that are headed to prison soon, and if we are lucky, he will find him a cellmate soon as well. But nevertheless, as we talk about weaponization, because this whole committee feels as if it's projection, I want to go to something that's pretty interesting, but I'm gonna start with Mr. Allen. I wasn't on this committee the first time you were here, so this is the first time we're interacting. But I am caught up to speed, and I have a simple question for you, yes or no. Do you believe that career employees like yourself should have your job taken away even if you've done your job well and followed agency rules? Do you think it's right to be fired just because you have political disagreements with those above you?
No, it's not right to persecute anyone for their political or religious beliefs, especially in an organization where there's supposed to be the free flow of ideas.
Okay, I appreciate your answer and your honesty, and I absolutely agree with you. It is interesting, though, because that's exactly what Trump and my Republican colleagues would do if they won the election. It's spelled out in Project 2025. Trump would strip due process rights available to career civil servants and remove, suspend, or reduce their pay in an all-out effort to oust agency employees for partisan reasons rather than because of issues with merit or performance. And before you say Trump and Project 2025 aren't affiliated, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit into the record Trump's campaign page where he claims on day one I'd reissue 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to fire rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. The only reason democracy is standing strong today is because we had public servants who pledged loyalty to the Constitution and rule of law and not to Donald Trump. Mr. Kirshner, your testimony today demonstrates you're familiar with Project 2025. Is that a fair statement?
Particularly as it pertains to the Department of Justice.
Okay. And you are aware, or maybe you're not, we'll see, on page 547, that Project 2025 states its goal of implementing a top-to-bottom overhaul of DOJ that, quote, must include the FBI, because anything less would, quote, guarantee the failure of the conservative administration's agenda.
That does not make a lot of sense to me.
Okay, but that's in Project 2025.
It is
okay.
Yes, it is.
All right, just wanted to clarify that. And also this agenda includes, for example, enforcing federal criminal laws against providers and distributors of abortion medication, as well as rescinding policies that hold that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, transgender identity, among other things. Is that correct?
Yes, Representative, on page 562, they talk about aggressively going after prosecuting, quote, providers and distributors of abortion pills that use the mail. So folks who are, mailing abortion pills to women who need it, that is really not what is endangering our country or inspiring, violent crime.
I absolutely agree. This week, the New York Times reported multiple instances of Trump trying to weaponize the DOJ to retaliate against his political enemies, finding that, quote, Mr. Trump told Mr. McGahn that he wanted to order Mr. Sessions, the Attorney General, to prosecute Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Comey, and if Mr. Sessions refused, he would take matters into his own hands. I know my time is running out, so I just have to ask, Mr. Chairman, given you've convened this hearing, theoretically it's you, given that you've convened this hearing on weaponizing federal agencies, will you commit to publicly condemning Trump for attempting to weaponize the government and condemn Project 2025 for its efforts to do the same?
Gentlelady's time has expired. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Allen, I'm going to give you a little notice. You've written some notes. As far as I'm concerned, you're the person I'm most interested in hearing from. I'm from Charlotte. I've been to the Charlotte field office. I know some people there. I was extraordinarily impressed by you and the other whistleblowers when you previously appeared before the subcommittee. I'm impressed by you again. I haven't been able to be here the whole time. I'm going to yield you some time, just if you have things that you wish to say in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to say before I do that, and then I'm going to give Mr. Jordan the rest of my time, is I'm just overwhelmingly troubled by the fact that no one seems to be able to do much about what has happened to you. You got the Inspector General, very respectable person. You've done a lot of things that have been historic, but you issue a management alert. And to me, it sounds ridiculous to say you don't think these guys at the FBI, the senior managers, understand that they shouldn't retaliate against somebody by putting them under extreme personal hardship while they engage in a completely baseless persecution over their security clearance. And they leave them in limbo for 27 months. And to this moment haven't paid what I understand to be the consideration under the settlement that's been reached. That is astonishing. And if that's not astonishing enough, that all you can do is issue an alert, Congress does absolutely nothing. In the majority party, not one thing to impose on the Department of Justice or the FBI an appropriate sanction for what they've done. And we have a hearing about it, and everybody in the minority party, they're fearing what Donald Trump would do in the next administration while they sit here and they look at the guy who's been persecuted by the FBI. And everybody in the room understands it. Mr. Allen, do you have comments you wish to make? I'll give you about a minute and a half, and then I want to turn the rest of my time to Mr. Jordan.
Yes, sir. I would just say that I consider the hearing today my last act of service as a public servant for the United States of America. And I'll give you my professional opinion. I was an intel professional for our country for many years, and I would give recommendations, and I'd also look at indications and warnings. So I would offer this to the American people as my warning to them. Since this is a warning to the American people, I say, I personally have no confidence that the FBI will rein in its own conduct. I've been persecuted along with Garrett, Steve and Kyle, and countless other whistleblowers. It is my opinion that the Bureau used reprisal and fear to control the workforce. It has been a seemingly effective tactic. I personally believe that there are no current effective checks and balances against them conducting lawless action with any type of correction in a legitimate time frame. I welcome the work of the IG, but I think any type of lawless action, there's no legitimate time frame to rein them back in. Their ability to overclassify information can allow them to stonewall forever. To the American people, you have a duty as a citizen to vote, and I strongly urge you to do so. It's how you participate in the American experience. I know people have doubts about election integrity, but you must vote. It is your claim. Stake your claim and don't forfeit it willingly. Have your voice heard. My other recommendations are in the natural order. First, vote The second is the Second Amendment. Arm yourself and know how to defend yourself. Make 3 to 4 friends in your neighborhood and promise to come to each other's mutual aid in times of hardship. And during the Great Depression, people stocked up a pantry. So I think that's a good practice, especially in our economic times, and make sure you have 3 to 4 months of food. And as a person of faith, I'd say pray the rosary, go to the First Friday devotions. That's for everybody, all my brothers and sisters of all faiths, and I know I'm Catholic, and read the gospel of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and live it every day. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for the time.
You know, Mr. Allen, the fact that there are servants like you who have borne up under persecution that a lot of political leaders in this country do not care about is the thing that heartens the American people, and I'm confident the American people will resolve the situation no matter how weak Washington is in response. Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry I didn't reserve much time for you, but I yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, for those well-said words. Mr. Horowitz, did you ever request permission from the Deputy Attorney General to investigate attorney misconduct in Special Counsel David Weiss's office?
I have not, at this point, asked for that authority. As we've engaged on this issue in the past, it's, first of all, not clear whether we have that authority. I'd have to have that discussion. But secondly, while the prosecution was ongoing, it was my view, consistent with our policy and practice, to let that prosecution play out. And then...
Do you have concerns?
I think there have been a number of legitimate concerns raised, yes, Congressman.
The time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Donald Trump's Project 2025 is direct attack on women's reproductive freedom and health care. And one of its most effective assaults on our rights comes from its call to criminally punish health care providers who distribute FDA-approved abortion medication by mail. This would effectively end access to a safe legal procedure that 2/3 of American women who seek an abortion rely on. And how would Trump's Project 2025 do that, Mr. Chairman? By weaponizing our federal government against women and doctors. The most corrosive attack would direct the Justice Department to ban the mailing of abortion pills by enforcing an obscure 1873 obscenity law called the Comstock Act. You heard that right, a 151-year-old obscenity law. Mr. Kirshner, could reviving this 19th century statute and weaponizing DOJ to enforce it block a clinician from sending abortion pills to patients?
It could.
And yes or no, could it stop the manufacturers from even delivering mifepristone pills to clinicians and pharmacies?
It seems it could.
Trump's Project 2025 directs the Justice Department to start using its surveillance powers to monitor these pill makers and goes so far as to name them in their blueprint. Mr. Kirshner, could that kind of shadowing result in medicine companies being targeted and harassed?
Yes.
Could weaponizing the Justice Department to enforce this Civil War-era law in fact create a de facto nationwide ban on mifepristone?
It could.
This isn't about politics. This is about control. It's about denying women the ability to make decisions about our own bodies. It's about putting Donald Trump and J.D. Vance right in the exam rooms of doctors and millions of women. It's about punishing and even jailing doctors who provide compassionate care or loved ones who help you obtain the health care that you seek. Mr. Kirshner, I want to ask you about another way Trump's Project 2025 would weaponize our government against millions of women and doctors. The medicine we're talking about, mifepristone, has been deemed safe and effective by the FDA for over 25 years. Women in nearly 100 countries have safely used it for decades. Yet, Mr. Kirshner, Trump's Project 2025 would require the FDA to, quote, revisit and withdraw its initial approval of mifepristone, falsely claiming without evidence these drugs are dangerous and should be illegal. Would that Project 2025 agenda be based on sound medicine, science, and facts, or would it be a blatant weaponization of the FDA?
The latter, and it sounds like it's based on politics, not on science, not on medicine, and not on what is best for women and the decisions they have to make with their doctors.
Thank you. The FDA recently allowed certified brick-and-mortar pharmacies to dispense mifepristone and doctors to prescribe mifepristone via telehealth, which expands abortion pill access, avoids added costs or stigma. But Trump's Project 2025 calls for the FDA to reverse that guidance, despite the Supreme Court recently rejecting that argument. It goes even further by eroding the privacy protections of abortion patients by promoting prosecution for women who take the pills. Could this weaponization of our government agencies obliterate the privacy of those who obtain or dispense abortion pills?
It could, and it's dangerous.
Project 2025's assault on our basic freedoms doesn't just stop at women's health. It undermines the safety of whole regions of our nation. Before my time expires, I'll quickly note that Trump's dangerous Project 2025 proposes to eliminate the National Weather Service in its entirety. I'll remind everyone that we have Hurricane Helene, who is quickly approaching the shores of my state. This is the very agency responsible for helping us prepare for and respond to climate change-driven natural disasters. Right now, Hurricane Helene bears down on Florida, and it's the National Weather Service that provides critical forecasts that help warn and keep our communities safe. Let's be absolutely clear. Project 2025 is not about reform, it's about control. Whether it's women bodies or the agencies that protect us from disaster, Trump's Project 2025 would erode the freedoms that we all take for granted. We cannot allow Trump's dangerous agenda to strip away our rights and leave millions more vulnerable than ever. Whether it's criminalizing healthcare providers or dismantling the National Weather Service as more hurricanes threaten our coasts, Project 2025 is an existential threat to our nation's core values and safety. We will not let this agenda undo everything we've fought for, because we will not go back. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair asks unanimous consent to enter into the record a coalition's letter on reforms that are needed. The letter is addressed to Chairman Comer, Chairman Turner, and myself, Ranking Member Nadler, Raskin, and Himes. Without objection, that will be entered. Chair now will recognize. Yeah, you recognize the ranking member for as much time as she'd like. I'll give you 6, 7 minutes, 8 minutes if you'd like, and then or a closing statement after that. And then I have a couple more questions, and then we'll be adjourned. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I don't know what to do with all that time. Kind of freaked me out when you said that. I started,
you could always yield it back to me.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm not giving up what's given to me, I'll tell you that much. You never know when you can get that, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here, each one of you. Thank you for expressing your ideas and your thoughts. I did want to ask some follow-up questions, though, to some of those. Mr. Inspector General Horowitz, my colleagues across the aisle have said that the Inspector General found that the FBI intentionally weaponizing the security clearance process to purge conservatives from its ranks. Mr. Inspector General, did your office find that the FBI has a pattern or practice of misusing the security clearance adjudication process to purge certain FBI employees?
We have not made such a finding.
Okay. And also, there were allegations made that the FBI has weaponized this, any findings that it was related specifically to individuals who might have expressed sentiments with regard to January 6th. Did you find that?
We haven't made such a finding. We've actually, Congresswoman, had complaints come in from both sides on these issues. On one side, complaints about field offices not taking action in January 6 cases, and on the other side, complaints about offices that did take matters in January 6 cases.
So, as usual, it's across the board of the political
We have
spectrum.
complaints from whistleblowers on both sides on that issue.
And that is par for the course you have found in the FBI and in your position over hearing from your other Inspector General officers that complaints may come from both sides of the political spectrum.
I've certainly seen, with regard to the DOJ law enforcement components, issues coming from various perspectives. I will say non-ideological, ideological complaints across.
What about religious? Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians?
We've not made such a finding.
Or targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Thank you. You know, I understand my colleagues' concern that it would appear that Democrats are not taking the issue of whistleblowers seriously. And I think we do. We have a committee for that, the Oversight Committee, for which when I was a member of the oversight, that's when I first met Mr. Horowitz, was in having oversight over different agencies and questioning you about some of your findings there, some of which, when I first came to Congress, were targeted against a Democratic administration, at the time, the Obama administration. We've gone through a Trump administration, we're now in a Biden administration, and so the vagaries of political persuasion, you've seen them all. But I think the reason that the Democratic members have been bringing up Project 2025 and President Trump is because it presents a global threat, a true weaponization of offices and of a position against the American people as a whole. We see places like North Korea, Hungary, Iran, now Venezuela, where those citizens could not have imagined 20, 30 years before, potentially, that they are living under a dictatorial rule. I went to school with individuals, I'm dating myself, in the early 80s with students who had fled Iran. I have been around young people in undergrad who have fled North Korea. And the notion that anything like that could happen in this country seems so antithetical to our thinking. But we cannot drop the ball in when we see an individual or a group of individuals who have power trying to take that control. And it is our opinion, many of our opinion, that Trump, for his own purposes, has now joined forces with individuals who have offered Project 2025 as a means to an end for each one of their own desires. I would ask to submit to the record a CNN article, Trump claims not to know who is behind Project 2025. CNN review found at least 140 people who work for him are involved.
Objection.
Thank you. And in this article, and in other places, we will see the nexus of relationships between the president and individuals who have written this. 6 of his former cabinet secretaries, 4 individuals nominated by the former president as ambassadors, his first deputy chief of staff, my former colleague Mark Meadows, and also his longtime advisor, Stephen Miller, who were advising Project 2025. Federal Communications Commissioner under President Trump, Brendan Carr, Lisa Laurenti, who was a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, all wrote components of Project 2025. We have the American Accountability Foundation putting together a roster of current federal workers it suspects could impede Trump's plan for a second term. I would direct your attention to what we have up there on the screen, which shows so many associates who have, in fact, contributed to the transitional plan for a presidential Trump next term that are part of his orbit. Paul Dans, top official in Trump's White House. We have Ben Carson, former HUD secretary. Christopher Miller, acting Secretary of Defense. Peter Navarro wrote a section defending the former president's trade policies. This has been drafted as the next conservative president's last opportunity. The last opportunity for what? Not the America we know now, a different form of America, one that meets the demands of specific individuals, not all of us. One women that does not include us having complete autonomy of ourselves. One that puts a form of Christianity that may not be my form of Christianity. That's why we have a separation of church and state, so that we can all worship our God as we wish. That's not what Project 2025 is looking towards. Today you may be part of it. Tomorrow you may not be. Today it may help you. Tomorrow it may not. I know I'm on the front line. I know my community's on the front line, but tomorrow it may be yours. Next week, next month, 180 days he's given himself. 2 years from now, it may be your son, your daughter, pointing in the military, pointing a weapon at their fellow citizen, at their brother or their sister who are protesting on the streets of America. Because yes, in Project 2025, it allows the president to direct the active military to come to the streets of the United States against those that he deems as political rivals. That's in Project 2025. Those are the things that are in there against us as Americans. And that's the reason why, Mr. Chairman, we keep talking about it. Not because whistleblowers' issues are not unimportant, but because this is a clear and present threat right now to the American people that we need to join forces with and stop. So I want to thank you for the additional time. And while we're on the recess, God bless you and your family. And I pray safety for all of us as members, all of people who have spoken out, and individuals we may not agree with one another. But I pray that this election goes safely and that we are all back here again to continue the people's business.
I agree. Just a few more questions, if I could. Mr. Horowitz, you said you've not seen a pattern, but you have found evidence, or let me do it as a question. Have you found any evidence of a focus on religion and vaccination status playing a role in discussions about clearance decisions?
We certainly did, as to Mr. Allen.
Of course. I mean, that's the whole point. I thought, you know, his email questioning the leadership at the FBI, they used that. They used his vaccination status. They used his religion. I thought pretty soon they were going to accuse Marcus Allen of writing Project 2025. I thought that might happen. You didn't write Project 2025, did you, Mr. Allen? No, you had nothing to do with that. Mr. Levitt, you didn't either. Right, and I know Mr. Horowitz didn't have anything to do with that. Let's go to this questionnaire, because this questionnaire that was used by the FBI in these clearance discussions, I find very troubling. In the opening, in the sort of the preamble before they get to the questions, they say they're asking colleagues to rat on fellow colleagues. They say, you are being asked to provide information as a fact witness. Should you refuse to answer or fail to reply, action against your security clearance may be undertaken. So I find this amazing. Like, they're going to a colleague in a security clearance investigation, they're asking a colleague to talk about that individual, and if they don't, they're going to lose their security clearance. I mean, that, and then when you look at the question, do you find that a little troubling, Mr. Horowitz?
I certainly find I'm not sure I find necessarily the questioning of individuals about allegations troubling. How you tell them about it and talk to them about it is concerning, as you indicated, and certainly the questions were highly appropriate.
Certainly coupled together. Hey, we're doing a security investigation on Mr. Allen, as an example, and if you don't answer it, your security clearance is in jeopardy. And oh, by the way, here's the question. Did Mr. Allen ever voice support for President Trump? Did Mr. Allen ever express concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination? Did Mr. Allen ever attend a gun rally? That is as troubling as it gets. And right at the top of this questionnaire, FBI Security Division, Security Integrity and Investigation Section, Clearance Investigation Unit. Mr. Levitt, have you ever seen anything like this?
Not before this last round of whistleblowers, but I do think the point I tried to make earlier is even if this questionnaire was only typed up by a couple of individuals, and to be clear, those are the same ones that were worried about the Kelly cart. So they're the same ones that were worried that they're right. Supervisors. But even in cases where this questionnaire wasn't used, we've heard from a number of whistleblowers that these types of things were asked about, and of course we know they factored into the decisions. And so I think it's not just about the questionnaire, right? I hope that the Inspector General's office will look at how all of these issues were focused on by leadership.
That's the element of fear Mr. Allen just talked about in his last response to Mr. Bishop. The fear, that environment of fear. And this is it in practice, right here. That is what is scary. So if that's not weaponization of government, earlier Ms. Crockett asked about, would the weaponization of government include certain things? It would certainly include this in the environment described by Mr. Allen, and it would certainly include the 27-month that he had to live through in the 24 months now Garrett O'Boyle has had to live through. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Oh, Mr. Kirshner, would the weaponization of government include lying to the FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign? You got asked a series of questions. Would it include? I'm just curious if you thought that would be the weaponization of government.
You know, lying to a court, any court, FISA court or otherwise, is deeply troubling.
That wasn't the question. Would the weaponization of government include lying to a FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign?
I would suppose it could.
Could?
Yeah.
Oh, good, okay. Would it include text messages written by people who were involved in that effort to spy on presidential campaign? Text messages like, don't worry, we'll stop Trump. Would that be the weaponization of government as well?
You know, I think that's inappropriate language because we're supposed to be doing our work, you know, apolitically, without fear or favor. So, you know, I think that's ill-advised.
Sure was. It's so ill-advised. Mr. Mueller kicked those individuals off his team. So ill-advised that Kevin Kleinsmith got prosecuted for lying to the FISA court in order to go spy on a presidential campaign. That seems to me to be the weaponization of government as well. I'm going to thank all of you for being here. Mr. Allen, we really thank you. You're the one who's had to endure this, your testimony to the strength of your faith and your family, I think, is just inspiring. We appreciate your service to our country, service to this committee and to the country for telling your story and being willing to come forward and work with Mr. Levitt. Mr. Horowitz, we appreciate the work you've done over the years in getting this information to us. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.